Right.
Oh, Arsenal fans should be smiling. They should be smiling ear to ear because this is the player that they have wanted and that could give them the final piece.
Viktor Gyökeres arrived at Arsenal with a reputation built on dominance. 97 goals in 2 seasons.
Viktor Gyökeres. It's Gyökeres!
Champions League nights where elite defenses were torn apart, and a profile that screamed inevitability. Yet months into his Arsenal career, the numbers look uncomfortable.
You know, there's a lot of players who are the first option. I don't think Gyokeres is the first option.
5 league goals, an XG of 6.39, 90 touches in the opposition box. Enough involvement to matter, but not enough output to silence doubts, and still, Arsenal are winning. They're top of the league, 1 step from a Carabao Cup final, progressing in Europe, and getting goals from everywhere.
There's a lifted forward here from Martinelli. Oh, what a finish!
Midfield runners, wide forwards, late arrivals. Players like Marino, Trossard, and Martinelli are thriving. The team looks stronger than last season. So here's the uncomfortable question no one is asking properly. What if Gyökeres isn't failing at Arsenal, but functioning differently? What if the same striker who destroyed Manchester City on the biggest stage doesn't need more chances, but something far more specific? What if the real story isn't in his goal tally, but in the space he creates, the defenders he pins, and the structure Arsenal are quietly building around him? This is the one thing Viktor Gyökeres must get right to succeed at Arsenal. Why the numbers alone don't tell the full story, and why, once you see it, the debate around him will never sound the same again. Let's be direct. Viktor Gyökeres' Arsenal story so far has been confusing because the headline moments haven't matched the expectation of the signing. In the league, the raw return is 19 appearances, 5 goals, with an XG of 6.39. That tells you 2 things at once. First, the chances have been there. This isn't a striker living on scraps. Second, the finishing hasn't fully caught up to the volume Arsenal's attack is generating around him. He's also had 90 touches in the opposition box and 11 shots on target inside the box, which matters because it confirms he's getting into the right zones often enough. The conversation can't lazily end at he's not involved. It's not that simple, and that's why the doubt has grown, because Gyökeres didn't arrive with potential attached to his name. He arrived with dominance attached. At Sporting, his output was framed in extremes: 97 goals in 102 games across 2 seasons, including 54 and 52 in his last campaign. That kind of history doesn't just create hype, it creates a mental benchmark. Fans don't compare him to the average Premier League striker. They compare him to the version of Gyökeres, who turned open space into inevitability. So when Arsenal supporters see 5 league goals, the immediate conclusion is obvious. He hasn't been convincing. But here's where this gets interesting, and where a serious analysis has to begin. The real question isn't, why isn't he scoring like Sporting? The real question is this underperformance, or is Arsenal asking him to do something different? Because Arsenal this season are not a team lacking goals or momentum. They're producing at a high level as a collective, and they're competing across every front. They've already taken a major step toward Wembley with that 3-2 win at Chelsea in the Carabao Cup semi-final first leg, where Gyökeres didn't just score, he assisted too. And that single detail, the assist, matters more than people realize, because it points toward a wider role than just put the ball in the net. Now, instead of defending him with excuses or attacking him with frustration, we do the only thing that actually holds up. We hunt patterns. Here's the method. We strip out the noise and focus on the games where he either scored or clearly changed the match. And then we look for what those games have in common. Not vibes, not social media clips. Actual repeatable conditions. And early signs point toward 3 things we need to examine properly. 1. Faster progression. When Arsenal move the ball forward earlier, before the opposition block is fully set, Gyökeres looks like a different striker. There's less wrestling, more running, more face-to-goal actions. 2. Earlier vertical passing. Not endless circulation. Not waiting for the perfect picture. The moments where Arsenal play into him or beyond the line with speed. Those are the moments where his physicality becomes a weapon instead of a burden. 3 fewer touches with his back to goal. This is critical. When Gyokeres is forced to play as a permanent wall pass striker with defenders tight to him, you reduce what made him special in the first place. When he's allowed to receive on the move or attack space in the channels, everything changes. That's why Chelsea is such a useful reference point, not because it proves he's arrived, but because it shows the version of Gyokeres that Arsenal signed: early involvement, space to attack, and contribution beyond finishing. So yes, 5 league goals is a fair reason for doubt, but the deeper point is this: the numbers don't just show a striker struggling, they also show a striker frequently present in dangerous areas in a team that's already functioning at a high level, and that combination usually means something tactical is hiding underneath. And if we can isolate the pattern, what changes when Gyökeres works, then we can stop arguing about whether he's good enough and start answering the real question: what does Arsenal need to consistently give him so Chelsea stops being an exception and becomes the standard? Here's the thing about Viktor Gyökeres at Arsenal: calling it a form issue misses the whole point. This isn't about confidence or settling in, it's about the game being built differently around him. At Sporting, everything clicked because of how they set up the match. They didn't just create chances, they created the kind of chances that make Gyökeres absolutely lethal. Look at that night against Manchester City in November 2024. Sporting 4-1 on the stat sheet. It reads like a City masterclass. 73% possession, 20 shots, 11 corners. Sporting barely touched the ball by comparison. But here's what the numbers don't tell you: Sporting didn't care about having the ball. They cared about what happened the moment they won it back. City's defenders weren't defending a settled box. They were constantly turning, sprinting back toward their own goal, trying to recover. And that's Gyökeres' playground. He doesn't need 20 touches to hurt you. He needs 3 or 4 moments where you're already facing the wrong way, already scrambling. He destroyed them with a hat trick, not because he was suddenly superhuman, but because the conditions were perfect. Defenders making desperate challenges, space opening behind the line, transitions happening at speed before anyone could get set. That's the key word: friction. Sporting removed it. Gyökeres wasn't wrestling with center backs on his back every time the ball came near him. He was running into channels, hitting the box at pace, forcing defenders into panic mode. Now compare that to what Arsenal do. The numbers tell the story: 40 goals from 37 expected, over 700 touches in the opposition box across 21 league games. Arsenal dominate. They pin teams back, control the final third, build pressure until something breaks, and that completely changes what it's like to be the striker. The box is crowded now. Defensive lines sit deep because there's no space behind them to worry about. Center backs can be aggressive, physical, right up against you. You're not bursting into open piece of grass. You're fighting for every inch in traffic. Look at Gyökeres' stats: 90 touches in the box, so he's definitely getting into the right areas. But that 21% dribble success rate, that's not poor form. That's what happens when you're constantly operating under contact, trying to hold off defenders, link play, turn in tight spaces. It's a completely different job. But here's where it gets interesting. There was one match, Burnley away in November 2025, where you could see both versions of Gyökeres in the same game. Arsenal won 2-0, controlled things comfortably. Gyökeres scored from a corner, which is significant because set pieces are one way around the congestion problem. But the second goal, that's the one that matters. Sky Sports called it a scintillating counter, and they're right. Arsenal won the ball and immediately went vertical. Gyökeres played this brilliant crossfield pass to release Trossard, whose delivery found Rice arriving late to head in. That sequence, that's when you see the Sporting version flash through. Quick turnover, instant forward intent, one pass that forces defenders to turn, runners attacking space before the block gets set. Even in Arsenal's more controlled structure, that moment had everything Gyökeres thrives on, and there's one more detail from that match. Gyökeres got injured at halftime, and Arsenal looked completely different without him. Not just less effective, different. His presence changes their rhythm, adds directness, makes defenders think twice about stepping up. So here's the tension. Sporting's best Gyökeres performances came in games built on transition chaos. Defenders turning, channels opening, recovery scrambles. Arsenal's structure creates dominance, and dominance creates congestion, which means Gyökeres does a lot of valuable work under physical pressure with less runway to attack. But when Arsenal deliberately inject early verticality like they did against Burnley, you suddenly see flashes of the player who terrorized the Champions League. That's not a weakness, it's just a structural reality. Once you understand that, asking whether he's convincing enough feels like the wrong conversation. The better question, the more useful one, is this: how often can Arsenal create the conditions that turn Gyökeres Gyökeres from a physical presence in congested spaces into a striker attacking defenders who are already backpedaling? That's the puzzle Arteta needs to solve, not fixing Gyökeres, engineering moments where the game bends toward his strengths. If you're only looking at Viktor Gyökeres' goal tally, you're missing the more interesting story. Arsenal's goals are coming from everywhere now, and that's not an accident. Start with the most obvious beneficiaries, the players arriving around him. Mikel Merino has 3 goals and 3 assists in the Premier League this season. Now, Merino isn't the type of midfielder who camps in the box waiting for tap-ins. His goals usually come from those late runs into the area, the kind that only work when center backs are already busy dealing with someone else and can't step out to meet him. Leandro Trossard has been brilliant, 5 goals and 4 assists so far. And it's not just that he's finishing, he's helping create too, which tends to happen when opposition defenses are sitting deeper. When the striker occupies 2 defenders, those half spaces open up earlier, and Trossard gets cleaner angles to receive the ball, drive forward, and slip in the final pass. Then there's Gabriel Martinelli. That Portsmouth FA Cup match tells you everything you need to know about what benefiting from structure actually looks like. Arsenal's match report confirms Martinelli scored his first ever Arsenal hat-trick as the Gunners came from behind to win 4-1. That's not just a nice moment, it's a sign that Arsenal are finding ways to get their wide forwards into dangerous positions through cutbacks, second balls, and quick transitions, rather than leaning on one striker to do all the finishing every single week. So here's where it gets interesting. What if Gyökeres' real value at Arsenal is partly about occupation and disruption? Think about it. A physically dominant number 9 changes how center backs have to defend. They sit a bit deeper, they mark tighter, they hesitate before stepping into midfield to press. And that hesitation, that's oxygen for Arsenal's runners and creators. It also fuels second phase pressure. Clearances don't travel as far, duels increase, and Arsenal's midfielders are arriving onto loose balls while the opponent's shape is already compromised. Now, zoom out to Arsenal's bigger picture, because the team context is the strongest argument that this is more than just a striker struggling. In the Premier League, Arsenal's record stands at 15 wins, 4 draws, 2 losses, 49 points from 21 games, top of the table. They've scored 40 and conceded just 14, which aligns with the club's messaging that their defensive foundation from last season has remained elite. In Europe, UEFA's official Champions League stats show Arsenal have scored 17 goals and conceded only 1 with 5 clean sheets. That's dominance by every measure: output, control, results. In the Cups, Arsenal are exactly where elite teams want to be in January. They have a 3-2 first leg advantage in the Carabao Cup semi-final at Chelsea, with the return leg coming up on February 3rd, and they're through in the FA Cup after that 4-1 win over Portsmouth. League leadership, Europe's best defensive numbers, cup progress. That combination creates a completely different lens for evaluating Gyökeres. If Arsenal were struggling, you could argue he's dragging the system down, but they're not struggling. They're winning, scoring, and defending at title pace while showing that goals can come from all over the pitch. Which raises the key question: if Arsenal are improving as a collective, is Gyökeres part of that evolution, even when the final touch isn't his? We need to be careful here. Correlation isn't causation. Arsenal's rise is never down to one signing, but it's reasonable to say this: in a team built on structure, pressing, and territorial dominance, a striker who pins defenders, increases chaos on second balls, and creates cleaner spaces for runners can meaningfully contribute to the team's output, even when his personal goal column looks modest. And that's why this discussion can't just stop at 5 league goals. The real question is whether Gyökeres is helping Arsenal become more complete, a team that can win through control, set pieces, and wide attackers, while still having a striker profile that forces opponents to defend deeper than they'd like. If he is doing that, then the next question isn't, is he good enough? It's, how do you turn that quiet structural value into consistent, repeatable end product? When you step back and look at the full picture, Viktor Gyökeres' Arsenal story becomes far less about disappointment and far more about definition. This season has shown us 2 truths at the same time. First, Arsenal are a stronger, more complete team than they were last year. They are competing at the top of the league. They are 1 step from a domestic cup final. They are progressing in the FA Cup, and their Champions League metrics point to control, balance, and defensive authority. This is not a team searching for identity. It is a team refining it. Second, Gyökeres Gyökeres has not been asked to play the same role that made him unstoppable at Sporting. His numbers reflect that shift. He is operating in tighter spaces, under heavier contact, and within a system built on territorial dominance rather than transition chaos. Judged purely as a volume goal scorer, he looks underwhelming. Judged as a structural piece, the picture changes. The evidence suggests that Arsenal do not need Gyökeres to become a 30-goal striker to justify his presence. They need him to do three things well and consistently: occupy center backs, create disorder in defensive lines, and allow others to thrive around him. In many matches this season, that is already happening, even when it goes unnoticed, but the final step is still missing. For Gyökeres to move from useful to decisive, Arsenal must be intentional about when they release him into space. Not constantly, not recklessly, just often enough. Earlier vertical passes, quicker recognition of channel runs, moments where control gives way to acceleration. When that balance is struck, his profile stops fighting the system and starts amplifying it. So this is not a story about patience, excuses, or blind faith. It is a story about alignment. If Arsenal align their dominance with selective directness, Viktor Gyökeres will not need defending. The conversation will change on its own, from whether he fits to how opponents can possibly stop him, and that ultimately is what success for him at Arsenal will look like.